It's McLaren Mercedes Oscar Piastri on the pole for the sprint race at Spa. 15 laps tomorrow, in theory in the dry, if the weather forecast can be believed. McLaren 1-3 in qualifying, split by Max Verstappen in a much revamped Red Bull Honda. So Oscar on the front row, Max alongside him, looking probably to get a tow on the opening lap, even though DRS won't be deployed at that point. Probably get a tow going into and get a pass going in at the top of the hill. But then, of course, when DRS is activated, Oscar could well then regain the lead, and he's got a massive advantage in Sector 2, where there are lots of medium speed and slower speed corners where the McLaren has a huge advantage over the Red Bull. We'll get onto that in a minute. Just look at the other times of sprint qualifying. Charles Leclerc, good job in the Ferrari to be P4, but look at Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman in the Haas Ferrari, same power unit, and that Haas car very, very near the Ferrari. Quicker indeed in Sector 3. Very impressive performance from both of those two drivers. Carlos Sainz too, good job in the Williams Mercedes after a difficult start to the day. Had a problem getting power onto the road. They got that fixed, software issue, I guess. And Carlos Sainz comfortably through into Q3, doing a good job there. Just as a reminder, they run medium tyres in SQ1, SQ2, and then switch to the soft tyres for SQ3. Pierre Gasly, again, manhandling that Alpine round, doing a very good job. But his teammate, Franco Colapinto, way down the back. Again, no surprise there. That's what we've been seeing a long time. Let's get Jack Doohan back into that second car. So Pierre Gasly also in Q3, very good job, as did Isaac Hadjar, again quicker than Liam Lawson in the other car. And Gabriel Bortoleto, very good job for Sauber Ferrari as well to make it through into Q3. Liam Lawson, the first of the non-qualifiers, if you like, on the medium tyres didn't get into Q3. Ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, very disappointing again, but again continuing to show, I guess, that the Red Bull is not an easy car to drive despite these recent upgrades. But the big stories of qualifying really were that George Russell didn't get through into Q3 and that Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari didn't get into Q2. He didn't even get out of Q1. George Russell, at the end of his run where he didn't go quickly and the track got a little bit quicker right at the end, that's when we saw the Haas Ferraris and Bortoleto suddenly going quickly and basically gazumping George out of it. George said the tyres just overheated on the medium tyres. So Mercedes having a lot of tyre temperature issues on the medium tyre. Difficult tyre to manage, quite obviously. And Lewis Hamilton didn't get out of Q1. He was looking pretty good on his opening lap in Q1 till he got to the bottom of the hill around the Stavolo area through a right-hander. There was a lot of dust in front of him because Kimi Antonelli had gone off in the Mercedes. He rejoined, but it was a big, wide lose, lots of gravel on the track as he was rejoining. Lewis had a moment there, and then obviously that was a slow lap, then had to do a second lap. And on the second lap, pretty good lap, would have got into the top 6 or 7 for sure, but lost it completely under braking, would you believe, for the chicane right at the end of the lap. Just lost the rear and spun. I've never seen Lewis do something like that. I mean, he probably has, but I can't remember a time when he's done something just as basic as that. And that, to me, is complete lack of feel, certainly for the back end of the car. Probably the rears were massively overheated. And, of course, he'd done 2 laps by then, so which wasn't a good thing. But very sad to see that. I thought he was driving pretty well. He looked a little bit like the old Lewis that we'd seen at Silverstone. Nice early entries. But just, he must be absolutely destroyed now mentally, I would think, to be starting right at the back there, 3 places from the back, and spinning like that in front of the grandstands, basically in front of the pits. The whole thing, complete mess for Lewis Hamilton. I mentioned the upgrades on the Red Bull, lots of upgrades actually, and I thought on this occasion, well, probably might do all this in the future as well, but I thought it might be interesting and fun for sure to go through the upgrades as described by the teams and looking at the vernacular they use and the descriptions they use. Some teams obviously giving away more information than others, but they do have to describe what they're doing from one race to the next to the car, to the FIA, and that is then made available to the public. So I think it's quite a cool thing. And on this occasion, I think it's because we've had a 3-week hiatus since Silverstone, and quite a lot of these upgrades related to low downforce circuits, Monza coming up as well, and some other circuits with long straights too. We know about those. Quite a lot of them revolving around that. But the most interesting thing is to see how the engineers phrase the work they've been doing from team to team. So let's just start with that. Alpine. Rear wing. The top rear wing has been redesigned and is less loaded. This reduces the drag efficiently and is an option for the upcoming tracks. Well, that's good. Perfect. Got it all sussed. What more do they need to do? Alpine beam wing. The beam wing has also been updated to offer an efficient alternative rear wing assembly suitable for these high efficiency tracks. So yeah, good. When you read it like that and it's nice and concise, it's almost like describing a meal in a menu, isn't it? You think, well, that's got to be delicious. And when it comes, it isn't actually quite as it seems. But when they've got away with words, these engineers, they're very good. And I say the engineers because I don't believe any non-engineer could be writing any of these descriptions. Aston Martin front wing. Now with reduced chord, the front wing flap lowers the loading on the front wing to achieve the necessary balance with the lower rear wing expected to be used at this event. Phew. In other words, less downforce, so they're making modifications. A new front wing assembly is based on a previous version with modified sections to suit the revised nose. At this event, it is introduced with a low-powered flap. I always love it when engineers refer to aero in terms of power. This wing develops a lot of power. And of course, that is a real description because it is power. It's air on the surface and it's generating downforce. It's just that we laymen don't really use the word power very much when we describe aero, do we? Well, I don't anyway. Aston Martin still, the nose. A shorter nose with the wing mounted from the second element improves the flow on the front wing assembly, generating an improved performance through the operating range of the car. Again, a little bit like the menu. Well, in that case, how can they possibly lose? And it's interesting, I think, to look at these because potentially these are the first real changes made by Adrian Newey since he joined the team. I'm not saying that's the case, but they're the sort of things where he might have got involved because it's front and rear wing and it's sort of the peripherals of the car, which are changeable and can be modified, obviously, relatively easily. Nothing structural here. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of Adrian Newey in these descriptions. Aston Martin rear wing. The upper rear wing with smaller sections for reduced front view area, in other words, frontal area, is less loaded than previous options to reduce drag in line with the expected setup for this circuit. Okay, fair enough. Aston Martin beam wing. That's the wing below the main wing. The rear wing and beam wing are less loaded than previous options to reduce drag in line with expected setup. So lots of mods there, a lot of work. Ferrari, rear suspension geometry, rear corner elements. It's interesting they talk about rear corner in the singular always, as if there's only one corner, but I'm sure they mean both. I hope they do anyway. All the teams seem to do that. This revision of the rear suspension geometry triggered a re-optimization of wishbone fairings as well as lower and upper winglet cascades with the aim to maximize aerodynamic efficiency. Interesting, eh? You can imagine at Ferrari in the drawing office, the way they segmented that and the way they got on with that. Okay, we're doing a new rear suspension geometry. The team over there will re-optimize wishbone fairings. The team over here will work on the upper winglet cascades. And there'll be all little subdivisions doing all that and trying to get the result they want in terms of more downforce, better airflow, less drag, whatever it is. And if they achieve that, back in Maranello, long before they get to the Belgian Grand Prix, there will be a bit of champagne cork popping for sure, because it's a little team working on these little things. I say little, they're enormous in terms of the performance of the car. So yeah, you can imagine all that, those subdivisions going on at Maranello. Ferrari rear wing flap element. Given the aerodynamic efficiency requirements of the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, nice to see them spelling the name out in full like that. A lower downforce modulation will be made available. Lower downforce modulation. Reducing the chord of the rear wing flap element. Good. Sounds as if that's kind of a direct translation from the Italian by Google to me, but anyway, we'll see. McLaren, low downforce rear wing. I say, just going back to Ferrari, I mean, when you read that, you think, well, with all these mods and all that, how can they possibly not be the quickest car on the track? Things stay the same, don't they? They don't tend to change very much, despite all this work, all these mods. McLaren, pretty basic for Spa. Why, if the car's brilliant, why change too much of it? Low downforce rear wing. Updated version of the low downforce rear wing assembly, improving overall efficiency across a similar drag range, suitable for multiple circuits. In other words, bad news for everybody else. And I'm sure McLaren know exactly what they're doing there, and they've got a nice improvement. Mercedes front wing, increasing the chord on the front wing's second element local to the end plate and reducing the forward element chord redistributes the tip vorticity and improves tire squirt and lower weight control. Now, I think everybody should have to learn that verbatim and repeat it 10 times quickly. I mean, good. all I can say is hats off to the engineers, because I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm sure they know precisely what they're doing, even though it doesn't seem to have made much difference to the Mercs so far this weekend. Rear corner again in the singular. Moving the drum lip inboard increases vorticity shed off the top edge, resulting in more outwash and improved rear tyre upper wake control. They love these obscure words, quaint words sometimes, engineers. Vorticity, not a word you hear very much. And I always remember James Allison talking about prosecuting a revision on the car, which is the correct use of the word prosecuting. I mean, they use these words. It's just wonderful, I think. And all that is mixed in with other great little phrases like more outwash and upper wake control. Yes, everybody has to look as if they understand what it all means. I think it means really, they just hope it's all going to make the car quicker, which it usually doesn't. Racing Bulls. Diffuser. Interesting. Nobody else talking about the diffuser for Spa, but anyway, doing a mod to the diffuser. The shape of the diffuser has been revised in order to improve the flow conditioning around the rear of the car. Well, yeah, we hope that's pretty much what it is going to do, because what else would it do if they're revising it? Rear wing as well at Racing Bulls. The upper rear wing has been changed to meet the needs of the target downforce and efficiency level for the circuit. Well, what is the target downforce and efficiency level? Is it the one they know McLaren have got, or is it one that Red Bull A-Team have got, or the one that they wish they had and they just arbitrarily going for it? We'll never know, will we? Red Bull A-Team now, the front wing. There are a lot of changes to the Red Bull, and I think it is probably going a little bit better. It's just that McLaren are also still going a little bit better too, so far anyway in the weekend. Front wing, the geometric changes revised the pressure distribution across primarily the first two elements of the assembled wing, raising the overall load derived from the assembly. In other words, more downforce. Good. Well, let's hope that manifests itself on the full lap. Yeah, right. Red Bull side pod inlet. Now this does cause drag, obviously the size of the inlet to the side pod. Noting the tracks approaching which challenge the power unit cooling systems, in other words, they've had some overheating problems, the inlet to the side pod radiators has been enlarged to exploit the better pressure now available. So yeah, they've gone to bigger inlets, which will cause drag because they've been having some overheating issues. And now, in line with that, the Coke line engine cover has been revised. Coke line is, if you look at the engine cover head on, it's that sort of shape, a little bit like a Coke bottle. That's what that comes from. And all the engineers seem to refer to that. It's part of, and the FIA, it's part of the, well, I think it's actually in the technical regulations as well. Having changed the side pod inlet, that made it larger, and therefore the split lines to the side pod part of the top body, the engine cover has been revised to link the side pod to the floor, maintaining the same cooling exit louver options. The inboard rear suspension shrouds have been revised to suit the new top body despite attaching to the bonded gearbox assembly. So I think what that means is they've got a few gaps that have appeared as a result of that, a few sharp edges, and maybe they're just smoothing everything over just to make sure there are no little vortices being generated, and reminding the FIA that the top body is still attached to the bonded gearbox assembly, which I guess they have to do for the regulations. Red Bull front suspension, revised inboard fairings on the top wishbone add more camber. Blending between suspension and chassis surfaces aids the pressure available at the new side pod inlet, therefore enhancing the cooling. So all this is to do with the cooling that is going on, and they've had to revise the inboard fairings as well. So when they said we've got some overheating issues, look at all the other things that then had to be changed on the car. Hopefully for an improvement. It's written in quite a positive vein, isn't it? But we talk about upgrades. In reality, this possibly isn't an upgrade. It's just getting the car to be a little bit more efficient cooling-wise. Red Bull rear corner, again in the singular. The rear wheel bodywork cascade wing assembly has locally more camber and a trailing edge trim to the end plate, adding load whilst maintaining flow stability. Oh, well, there you go. With that, Max is bound to be super quick in Sector 2 at Spa. No evidence of that yet, but, well, maybe he would be a lot slower if they didn't have that, this rear wing bodywork lower cascade wing assembly mod. They love it, don't they, the engineers? They love it. Floor fences on the Williams, a lot on the Williams. And I think Williams actually should get the prize for the best descriptions by the engineers of what they've been doing. And there's a lot of work on the cars here for Spa. The revised fence geometries redistribute the balance of loading through the floor fence channels. We're talking about the fences on the floor, the bottom of the car now. This increases the local front of floor loading as well as improving the potential for the downstream flow. Yeah, as you would expect. makes the car quicker, hopefully. Floor edges, big difference, really. The floor edge wing and spat. There you go. I haven't heard that word for a while. These engineers say it's brilliant. The vernacular they delve into have been reprofiled with a more complex curvature. Another nice word. The lateral hole at the rear of the spat has also been subtly reshaped. That's a quite poetic thing, isn't it? Subtly reshaped. You don't often see that those two words together in a technical description of the car. These modified geometries capitalize on the revised local onset flow, not only to improve local load along the edge of the floor, but also to benefit the inlet condition to the main diffuser. Yeah, got that out. Quite sure what it all means. I think it means, yeah, the car's going to be good. Williams side pod inlet. A little bit like Red Bull now. The lower lip of the side pod cooling inlet has been modified and is now lower at the inboard end and higher at the outboard end. This supports the revisions to the bodywork described whilst maintaining the same inlet cooling flow. The revisions to the side pod inlet work in combination with the downstream changes to the floor edges and side pod coke line. Whilst maintaining the required level of internal power unit cooling flow, we've also improved the level of potential flow energy to the rear of the car. So maybe they've done a better job than Red Bull. Not only have they made it cooler, but they've actually improved the potential flow energy. Wow. How do you measure things like that from car to car? But it'd be wonderful to do it. Put them all together or mix and match all the engineers for one day to see what they're all doing. Williams coke line engine cover. This is the last one. There is a deeper undercut to the bodywork, which is married to a modified floor upstand. I'll repeat that, which is married to a modified floor upstand. Lovely, isn't it? This is achieved by raising the lower surface of the main side pod belly. Again, I haven't seen that word used for a long time in a technical description. This in turn is achievable because of the changes to the side pod inlet. So quite a lot of side pod description going on here. The changes to the external side pod floor undercut help to improve the flow distribution to the floor edge and spat region, the spat region of the car, where it is utilized to improve the local floor load. And let's hope all that isn't taken off in some sort of first corner skirmish, because all the engineers, the technicians that have produced all those wonderful spats and upstands, they're precious to them. It's part of their life. And they could all go flying in the air in the first corner. La Source hairpin on lap one. Anyway, let's get down to business now, the real business now. Reality, really, I think is what we're talking about. To look at the difference between Oscar and Lando and how Oscar was able to put that lap together. Pretty similar in a straight line. Very similar in a straight line. Oscar 338, Lando Norris 337, so 1 kilometre per hour difference, enough I suppose to annoy Lando, but just only one. It wasn't really till they got to turn 9, which is if turn 8 is the irritating, annoying downhill long right hander, the horseshoe shaped corner where you get nothing but understeer and you just got to wait before you can get on the power. Then there's a short burst of power. Then turn 9 is even more irritating. It's a negative, well, it feels like negative camber, left-hander downhill, a corner where it's very easy to be slow and incredibly difficult, a bit like the left-hander at the top of the hill at Imola that I was talking about after Tosa. Very difficult to be quick there and to pick up time. But look at the differences. In turn 9, middle of turn 9, Oscar Piastri 217, Lando Norris 213. That's not just minimum speeds. Oscar's minimum speed there was 213 like Lando's, but he was only briefly there, whereas Lando sat at 213 pretty slow mid-corner, presumably with understeer, just waiting to get on the power, whereas Oscar was in and out of the power very, very quickly there, very good braking into the minimum speed point. And where Lando's doing 213 at exactly the same point, Oscar's already accelerating 217. So there's a big difference there in turn 9. And just for comparison, to show you where Red Bull are, quicker in a straight line, 343 compared with Lando Norris 337. So big difference there, 6 kilometers an hour. The Red Bull much quicker in a straight line. So Max is always going to be good in terms of getting a tow from the car in front of him and in terms of sector 1 anyway. But sector 2, and let's call turn 9 a classic example of what sector 2 is all about. It is all about downforce and grip. Just as a reminder, at a specific point in the middle of turn 9, Oscar Piastri 217, that's not his minimum speed, but at that point Max Verstappen 211. 6 kilometers an hour slower than Oscar Piastri in the middle of turn 9. And that is the difference between a McLaren and a Red Bull. Now, it's interesting because after that's downhill straight, and they're going to Pouhon, which I talk about often as one of the great corners in Formula One. One of the great corners, no doubt about it. And it proved itself to be that today as well. Big differences between the two McLaren drivers and big differences between the McLarens and everything else. Both McLaren drivers accelerating through the gears out of turn 9 into 8th. As they're going into Pouhon, they stay in 8th. Neither of them brake. The only difference is that Oscar Piastri comes out of the throttle about 10%. Lando Norris comes out of the power for longer at about 35 to 40%. So Oscar just slight lift and then flat again. Lando Norris a bigger lift for longer and then flat again, both in 8th gear. Charles Leclerc brakes in the soft tyre. We're talking about these quickest runs on the soft tyre in SQ3. Charles Leclerc on his quickest run, they all only got one run anyway, braked into Pouhon, lifted and braked. Beautiful lack of overlap, just perfect synchronization between throttle and brake, but he does brake going in there. And like Max, holds it in 7th gear. He doesn't get 8th before the corner. He holds it in 7th out of that run down the hill. Max Verstappen, though, hats off to Max Verstappen. There's always a Max Verstappen story in qualifying in some form or another, and this, of course, is sprint qualifying. I've got to remind you that. But into Pouhon, Max staying in 7th gear, like Oscar Piastri, just lifts about 10%, no braking, and at the exact point of entry where you can measure the difference between Oscar and all the other drivers, an exact point they go through, at that moment, Max Verstappen, 296, Oscar Piastri, 292, Lando Norris, 291, Charles Leclerc, 287. Big difference. Who's quickest into Pouhon? Max Verstappen. Exited Pouhon, again, Max Verstappen capitalizing on that entry speed, 302, now in 8th gear. Oscar Piastri, 299. Lando Norris 297, the same as Charles Leclerc 297. But that's where it kind of ends for Max. He's super quick through Pouhon, but then you get to the medium speed corners, typified by turn 14, which is a really important corner because it leads on to the long uphill stretch right up to the chicane where Lewis Hamilton spun. And on that corner, in the middle of that corner, which is all about downforce and grip and what state the tyres are in at that point of the lap, and on that measurable point of the corner, turn 14, medium speed corner, Oscar Piastri 178, Charles Leclerc 175, Lando Norris 174, Max Verstappen 169. He's in 5th gear. He's letting the car roll in 5th, whereas the two McLarens are in 4th. They can really get the revs up and they can really use the tyres through there. But Max, probably already feeling that his tyres are starting to overheat, keeps it in 5th to float the car a little bit more, not ask quite as much of the rear tyres. And look at that, he's 5 kilometers an hour down on a really important corner, which is the one which leads on the uphill run on the straight. And that's obviously where Max's lap has gone. If you look at the top speeds, yeah, Max quick 343, but that's a speed also matched by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari 343, and guess what, by the two Haas Ferraris as well, with the Ferrari engine, the same power unit as the factory Ferraris. The Haas is right up there, 343, whereas the McLarens 337 for Lando Norris and for Oscar Piastri 338. So a big difference there between Red Bull and McLaren in a straight line. And just as turn 9 is a snapshot of what is going on in Sector 2, where Max is losing time in Sector 2, that top speed is a snapshot of how much inherent downforce the McLarens have compared with the Red Bulls. And we can't say on this occasion, as we could at Silverstone, well, maybe McLaren are artificially running more wing because it may be wet for the race, because at the moment, and at the time of qualifying, it's predicted to be dry for the sprint race. Of course, it may well be different as we go into qualifying for the Grand Prix, with still a wet race to be forecast. So that sprint qualifying, it's a little bit artificial, as I say, because medium tyres for the first 2 parts of qualifying and then soft tyres for the third. That needs to be borne in mind when you look at the sprint qualifying results. And also Mercedes obviously not very good on the medium tyre. I suspect they would have been okay on the soft, but they were so slow on the medium they didn't even get through into SQ3 anyway. And then we had Lewis Hamilton, and then with that spin, I guess, to do with the rear tyres overheating as well. Anyway, we'll see what happens in the sprint race. Qualifying after that tomorrow for the wet race, predicted to be the wet race on Sunday. You can never tell really in the Ardennes Forest, but nonetheless that is the prediction, and we'll see what happens then. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and of course to REC Watches, and to you the viewer. Take care, see you then. Well, with a 90% chance of rain still for Sunday, it was fascinating to see how the teams approached qualifying in the dry, sunny weather in the Ardennes Forest today. Lando Norris on the pole, Oscar Piastri alongside him, and McLaren 1-2. No real changes to the downforce setups on the McLaren, possibly because of what happened in the sprint race today, where Max Verstappen scored a sparkling win for Red Bull Honda, took the lead as predicted at the end of the top straight on the opening lap before DRS was activated. And you always had the feeling that Oscar was going to be able to get close enough to DRS him later in the race from lap 3 onwards when he could use DRS. And sure enough, he was right behind him for the rest of the race, but he never actually got past Max. Now, a little bit of that for sure is Oscar with Lando right behind him, having had a similar opening phase of the race with Charles Leclerc's Ferrari. A little bit of that was the McLarens being very conservative, second and third, good result, extra points. Doesn't really matter if Max is going to win the sprint race. And some of it, of course, was beautiful driving by Max Verstappen. Incredible defence. Wonderful use of all the gizmos on the car. Very good use of, for example, the way he was adjusting the engine torque to try to get the car to handle a little bit better through turn 9, a corner that was always giving him trouble in the race. And sure enough, Oscar Piastri, as the sprint race started to develop, put the odd wheel on the edge, just over the curb, a little bit of dirt coming there, had to back off a little bit, and just gave Max enough free air. He was never ahead by more than 0.7 of a second. And as I say, you would imagine around Spa, for the guy behind in a car as good as the McLaren, that's tantamount to a win using DRS. But it didn't happen, and a lot of that was due to the superior top speed of the Red Bull. Because of that, because McLaren, I guess, felt a bit frustrated behind Max, not being able to get past, they probably went into qualifying thinking, yeah, we don't want to be slower than that on the straight relative to the opposition. Obviously, we got a great car. And so what they did basically was do nothing, which effectively is being quite aggressive, bearing in mind there's a 90% chance of rain tomorrow. It does show, of course, how good that McLaren is and how much confidence they have in that car in Sector 2, where most of the slow and medium speed corners are at Spa. But at the same time, it made for a very interesting comparison between Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari in qualifying. Lando Norris just quicker than Oscar Piastri. Lando did that time on his first run in Q3. On this occasion, he was behind Oscar, and he was relatively close to Oscar. He spoke afterwards about getting a bit of a tow. It was 1 kilometre an hour difference between the two of them. We're not talking a lot of speed there, but nonetheless, it was something for Lando, and he put the rest of the lap together beautifully and then didn't go any quicker on his second run. Oscar Piastri went slightly quicker, but would have been even quicker had his entry speed into turn 14, the really important corner that I spoke about yesterday, the right-hander effectively leading onto the long straight, taking you back up the hill. His entry speed into that corner on his second run was 4 kilometres quicker than it had been on the previous run, and he had to come out of the throttle, had to do a bit of massaging of the car through there, and that's where he lost some potential time. So McLaren on the front row, but then Charles Leclerc, very good third for Ferrari, 1:40.900. Max Verstappen 1:40.903. Charles did the time a little bit later than Max. I don't think that meant anything. In fact, the track was probably getting a little bit slower. But what this really means, as you can see from that, is that Max Verstappen was effectively driving a very different racing car today. He alone has put a lot more wing into the Red Bull on the basis that it's going to be wet tomorrow. He's a relative local, so I guess he knows what he's doing. And also don't forget that the Red Bull was terrible in the wet, in the greasy conditions at Silverstone. So you can see there the incredible drop that Max has had in top speed from one day to the next. Just put more wing onto the Red Bull. Yesterday, top speed of 3:43 just before they break at the top of the hill. Today, maximum for Max 3:37, which actually puts him slower of all his nearest opposition. Everybody else, though, more or less the same. Let's have a look at it in detail. Charles Leclerc hasn't touched the downforce on the Ferrari either. So he 3:44 today, 3:43 yesterday. George Russell has got the Mercedes going a little bit better on the soft tyre. It performs much better than it did on the medium yesterday, but it's still no easy task for the Mercedes drivers. Kimi Antonelli had again had a bad qualifying session. George did very well to qualify where he did. Tyre temperatures all over the place on the Mercedes. Anyway, top speed 343, pretty quick in a straight line relative to Charles Leclerc. So that's good from the point of view of being able to pass people, but it may not be good in terms of what George has to put up with in Sector 2 tomorrow with not much downforce in that car. Yesterday, 340. So if anything, they've taken wing out of the Mercedes. Alex Albon, really good job in the Williams Mercedes. Not a good day for Carlos Sainz in terms of qualifying, although he did have a very good sprint race, kept his grid position. Alex Albon today 340, which puts him kind of where the McLarens are. Quite a lot of relative downforce on the Williams Mercedes, and yesterday about the same, 341. That actually is the time that Carlos Sainz did yesterday because Alex Albon wasn't quick. He had an engine problem in qualifying, so bear that in mind. Then the two McLarens, as you can see, yesterday Oscar 338, today 339, Lando 337, 339. If anything, that probably reflects the small toe that Lando says he got from his teammate. Let's see how all that translated then into the way they did the laps in qualifying. Best sectors, Lando Norris, quickest in Sector 2. No real surprise there. They've still got a lot of downforce on that McLaren. Both McLarens 29.9 in Sector 1. 29.7 though for George Russell. Just shows how much wing they've taken out of that Mercedes. Max Verstappen though very slow now in Sector 1. Long time since we've seen that for Max in a Red Bull around Spa. Part of that is the amount of wing they're now running. Part of it is because he didn't get the tyres quite up to temperature in the way he had for his first run in Q3. He went in with the tyres a little bit cold as he came out of La Source. He had a bit of a moment. Lovely slide, power slide as he came out, but it was slow sadly. So that was a 30.0. 42.7 though in the middle sector for Max Verstappen on his quickest lap. That puts him in McLaren territory. Amazing to see that. McLaren have so much downforce. We know how much efficient downforce they've got. And here at Red Bull, not that far away in terms of top speed, and almost matching McLaren through the all-important Sector 2 in terms of grip and downforce around Spa. Max 42.7, Oscar Piastri 42.6, Lando 42.5. So that's very impressive. And as you can see there, George Russell, unbelievably slow in Sector 2, 43.4. Alex Albon the same in the 43s. Charles also struggling in Sector 2 because he's just not running enough downforce. But he is, however, very quick in a straight line. And then finally, Sector 3, again, George Russell, 27.8, really quick in the Mercedes, but not enough to make up for how much he lost in Sector 3. Max Verstappen, 27.9, again, pretty near the McLarens, 27.8, 27.8, and Charles Leclerc, 27.9. So if Max had got a decent Sector 1, you could say he's got a pretty good setup tomorrow. With the amount of downforce he's now got in the Red Bull, he's sort of in McLaren territory, and that will be good if it's wet tomorrow. As I say, 90% chance of rain tomorrow, but you never really know going into the Belgian Grand Prix in the Ardennes forest. Anything can happen with the weather. Now let's just go back and have a quick look at the lap time just to go through them. Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, 1-2. Pouin was the big thing, both in 8th gear on soft tyres in Q3 now, no doubt about that. But only two drivers absolutely flat through Pouin. I don't think I've ever seen that. Absolutely flat in 8th gear, not lifting at all as they're going to Pouin. One of them, Oscar Piastri. The other, Max Verstappen, with that downforce now he's got in the Red Bull, absolutely flat out, losing about 10 kilometers an hour just on tyre scrub and G-force load through the cars. He's going through Pouin, both of them, but absolutely flat. Whereas Lando into Pouin, lifting slightly. Didn't cost him a lot of time, didn't cost him a lot of pace, obviously, but just gives him that confidence lift. Very Lando Norris. And when he did his quickest lap, going into 14, the corner where Oscar, on his second run, had that bit of a moment, went in too quickly. Lando's absolutely beautiful then, does one of those Lando things where he just comes out of the brakes and throttle and just lets the car settle, and then he's very early and beautifully on the power. And I think a lot of Lando's lap time came from what he was doing there in turn 14. Charles Leclerc, very good, got everything he could out of that Ferrari, but is still in 7th gear like George Russell going through Pouin, and braking in 7th like George Russell. So not in the same class as the McLarens and Max Verstappen through Pouin. And Pouin is a bit of a litmus test in terms of how quick you are in Sector 2 anyway. So Charles Leclerc braking into Pouin like George Russell. Alex Albon, very quick time in the Williams Mercedes, 41.2. And then a lot of drivers didn't actually go any quicker in Q3. You can see the time they did in Q2 there in brackets. Yuki Tsunoda finally managing to get a reasonable lap time, a little bit closer to Max here at Spa, but not much, not enough really to be able to help him in the race tomorrow. Isaac Hadjar, again, very, very nice lap from Isaac in the Racing Bulls. Now without Laurent Mecchi, but doing a very good job. They've got some great people there, from Jonathan Eddles to Alan Permain, really good people. So that team just continuing to run like clockwork, no surprise there. Liam Lawson, though, right up there with Isaac Hadjar, though. He'll be pleased with that. First time since Austria that he's dancing with the music again. He's not going to be able to lean on the rear too much. He's got to do what he's got to do around Spa, and of course he has the talent to do that. So good to see those two cars up there. And very, very good lap 2 by Gabriel Bortoleto in the Sauber Ferrari, 42.3 and 41.3 in Q2. Excellent lap from him, really showing up his compatriot, if that's the right word, fellow South American, Argentina's Franco Colapinto, who again had a very slow qualifying session in the Alpine. Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman didn't make it through to Q3, but looked very strong in the Haas Ferraris. Also worth noting that Oliver recorded exactly the same lap time to a thousandth of a second in both Q1 and Q2, so that's reasonably consistent. Pierre Gasly had lots of drama before the sprint race. Didn't really shine the way he normally does in the last minute in the Alpine, but nonetheless, he should be pretty pleased with that 41.6, Colapinto 42.0. Yep, says it all. And then Nico Hülkenberg 41.7, almost half a second away from Bortoleto, underlining again the quality of Bortoleto's lap. Carlos Sainz 41.6 in Q1, then 41.7 in Q2. Lots of dramas, not happy with the car at all. But the big story, again, Lewis Hamilton 41.939. That was his second quickest lap. He did a 41.664, which would have put him into Q2, no problem. But that time was deleted because Lewis took too much apex curb at the top of the hill of Eau Rouge. Really a silly mistake, a little bit like the thing yesterday. Yesterday, mitigating circumstances, because that was his second lap on the medium Pirelli tyre, and a lot of his rivals, including Charles Leclerc, were finding it very difficult to get those tyres to do even one lap quickly. But today, to make that error under pressure for Lewis, very disappointing. It was pretty marginal. From the onboard, it's pretty marginal whether the right front was the wrong side of the line, but the stewards are there making that decision. So for Lewis, another horrendous qualifying session, and he'll be starting way down the back, with no chance of anything tomorrow, particularly if it's wet, really. I mean, if it's wet, the spray, the traffic, the standing water is going to be a nightmare down that part of the grid. Of course, anything can happen at Spa, and we've seen lots of big multi-car shunts at the first corner as well, lots of cars eliminated, but that's not to hope that any of that happens. But from Lewis Hamilton's point of view, if things happen normally and everybody makes a reasonable start and it's a clean start, very difficult for him to do anything now. And he must be doing some real soul searching now, because the second half of the year now, and he's at Ferrari. Charles Leclerc is driving a car capable of qualifying in the first 3, and here's Lewis on 2 days in a row not getting out of Q1, and it's not good enough. Obviously, he'll be saying that to himself. He doesn't need to hear people like me say that, but it's getting to be a problem. So, yeah, let's hope he has a better day tomorrow. In theory, it's going to be very wet at Spa tomorrow. Let's see what that brings. Thanks for watching. See you then. Well, it did rain at Spa in the Ardennes forest. The problem was it rained too hard for too long, as a result of which they delayed the start by over an hour, and that basically robbed the world of a wet Belgian Grand Prix. Yeah, there were a couple of laps where the track was pretty wet and there was a bit of mist and stuff in the air and it was difficult to see. But as Max Verstappen said as he was behind the safety car, if we do more than 2 laps behind the safety car, and they did 4, then for sure the track will be dry by lap 5 of the race. And he was about right. It was. Now, whether or not this was a good decision, there were no accidents, there were no incidents, there were no injuries. But at the end of the day, this could have been a brilliant Belgian Grand Prix in the wet. It didn't even have a standing start either. And I guess there'll be lots of discussion in the days after this race about whether this was the right way to go or whether we were robbed of what could have been, as I say, a sensational wet Belgian Grand Prix. And of course, in terms of the lineup of all the cars and drivers, there were some who had high downforce settings that wanted to go out in the wet, some who didn't want to go out in the wet. And if you're Lando Norris on the pole, you thought, well, I've got the clear track in the rain, I've earned that right, let's go racing. Well, it didn't happen. So that advantage was taken away from Lando. He was then given, like everybody else, the rolling start, which in theory was an advantage for Lando because it mitigated the problems of maybe getting the car off the line, the first corner, the locking up, whatever could have happened in La Source. So that was taken away. But what it did was give Oscar Piastri in the other McLaren, who'd qualified second, a really good look at Lando as they went down the hill behind the pits towards Eau Rouge. And from Oscar's point of view, the real opportunity to take the lead in this Grand Prix, racing as they were, these two McLaren drivers, was going to be on that opening lap, because once Lando was settled, it was potentially going to be more difficult to get into a tow and to be close enough to do the pass. So Oscar went for it. But interestingly, if you look at the traces going down the hill, it was Oscar who was backing off, going down the hill behind the pits in 7th gear. He got into 7th earlier than Lando, even though Oscar's in P2. He backs off a little bit in 7th just to give him a little bit of room behind Lando. And of course, at this moment, Lando probably isn't looking at his mirrors, but he can probably feel that Oscar's just timing a perfect maneuver. And indeed he does. He backs off less than Lando through Eau Rouge. He's got the momentum at the top of the hill by about 2 kilometers an hour. But then once in the tow of the McLaren, albeit a tow shrouded in mist and rain and vapor, albeit that, he pulls out of the tow and he's got something like an exponential increase of 7 to 8 kilometers an hour over Lando Norris. It's an easy thing. Too easy indeed, because Lando's top speed as he goes down that straight is only 306 kilometers an hour. I mean, even Max Verstappen with massive wing on the Red Bull is doing 313 on that opening lap. So what happened there? Well, what happened was that as the poleman behind the safety car, Lando used up more energy from his battery to do the start. So Lando paid the penalty indeed of being on the pole, of having to do these laps behind the safety car and then having to do the safety car start. They got it back then a lap, and then he was matching Oscar for top speed. But on that critical opening run up the straight, he was something like 7 kilometers an hour down on where he should have been. Probably Oscar would have got him anyway because he had the slipstream, but it made it easy for Oscar. He was well past before they got to the braking area. And after that, as Lando said after the race, it was basically all over. Oscar was the first to stop, giving Lando the lead, and it was a good pit stop for Oscar Piastri. But when Lando came in, there was a balk on the left front. It wasn't put on absolutely straight, and they had to just move it around. It was about 1.3 seconds added to that pit stop time, which didn't help, of course. And they put on the hard tyre for Lando Norris. There's a bit of a discussion just before he came in. What do you think about going to the hard, Lando? And he said yes as he came into the pit lane. Now that's okay, because, and I quite understand that, because if he's lost the momentum, he's lost the lead, he might as well try something different to Oscar to see whether it'll pay off. Obviously, the thinking is he could go through to the finish, the mediums could be marginal. And for a while out there, it looked as if Lando might indeed have caught Oscar. It was about 8 seconds by the time he rejoined and won the Belgian Grand Prix. But he didn't. On the face of it, he made 2 mistakes. He ran wide at Pouin on lap 26, and then he had a lock-up going into La Source shortly after that. But both of those moments were timed with the approach of cloud over the circuit again. It had been sunny for quite a while as they went to the slick tyres. Approach of cloud, ambient and track temperature dropped dramatically. And at that point, the hard tyre was the compound you did not want to be on. Lando was the only driver out there. And although he was pushing hard, yes, he was starting to lose grip. The medium tyre was the one to be on. And because of that drop in temperature, the medium then became a very good tyre to take to the end of the race. Even Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who didn't have a lot of downforce, found he had pretty good grip. More grip than Max Verstappen at the end of the race. They were racing for 3rd and 4th. Max had more downforce. In theory, was going to be kinder to his tyres. But Max lost the fronts in the last 3 laps of the race when those ambients went down. It became a very different racetrack yet again. So it was Oscar Piastri who won the race after qualifying second. Very good win. A win in the way of Alan Jones and Jack Brabham. We've said that before. Just a sweep past his teammate at the end of the straight on the opening lap, and then to pull away and to win the Grand Prix. An emphatic victory for Oscar after the Austrian and British Grand Prix, when it looked as if the momentum was going in the direction of Lando. For me, one of the most fascinating moments of the race was to see Lando's face when he took off his helmet and mask in Parc Fermé. And sure enough, it was not the traditional Lando Norris smile when that happened. A lot of things did not go right for him today, and he could look back at this and say it all started by being on the pole and having to do so many laps behind the safety car and using that energy that he had to in order to control the pace of the field behind him. Had it been a normal standing start, that probably wouldn't have happened. And maybe Oscar wouldn't have got the lead on that first lap. Lots of maybes, of course. The biggest maybe of all, of course, is Max Verstappen's and Red Bull's choice to run so much wing on their car. It wasn't really a gamble in terms of was it going to rain. It was pretty clear it was going to be wet. But we're in an era of Formula One now, particularly on a circuit like Spa with so many fast corners, where everybody, when I say everybody, the rule makers, the stewards, Liberty, the FIA, are very, very safety conscious and very conservative in the way they apply the rules. And even in the wet, when Max in theory had an advantage, there was nothing he could do. Charles had at least 3 to 4 kilometers an hour at the end of the straight in the wet, and it was only wet for 4 or 5 laps. And then when it started to dry out and they were on slicks, the difference lap after lap after lap was 9 kilometers an hour between Charles and Max Verstappen. Max would pull back maybe 0.3, 0.4 through sector 2. Yes, he had more grip, but Charles drove beautifully with that pressure and used the Ferrari perfectly in terms of its top speed advantage and not making any mistakes, apart from one lockup late in the race, to withstand the pressure from Max and to finish a very, very good third. But you got to say, and to repeat the point, in terms of Formula One in 2025 and how conservative the rule makers are now when it rains, is it ever going to be worth taking a gamble again and running setups of that extreme the way Red Bull did? Because to get any sort of advantage today, Max would have needed the track to be really, really wet. He would have needed the track to be exactly what it was when the race was due to start. They went out, did a formation lap, aborted the start, came in and sat around for an hour waiting for the track to dry. And at that moment, of course, the whole advantage, any advantage that Red Bull might have had, was flushed down the storm drains. Anyway, very good drive by Charles, as I say, and at the back of the grid, good drive too by Lewis Hamilton, up from 16th to finish P7. Looked very good for a while. George Russell got past Alex Albon without too much trouble. Mind you, they are mates. Well, they were mates. I think they're still mates. But Lewis on a charge, passing some reasonably quick cars, the Liam Lawsons of this world, for example. But then when he got behind Alex, he just couldn't get past. A while ago, if you'd said Lewis Hamilton was going to be stuck behind Alex Albon for most of the Belgian Grand Prix, Alex in a Williams Mercedes, Lewis in a Ferrari, you would have said, yeah, give me a break. But that's what happened. And I think we need to see Lewis's drive in that context. In the car that Charles Leclerc used to finish third and to outrace Max Verstappen, Lewis still couldn't get past Alex Albon. Now, that's not a Lewis Hamilton criticism per se. It's obviously to do with Ferrari as well. It's to do with the setup of the car. It's to do with all sorts of things. Lewis was the first to stop, to change, to go to slicks. And that's what enabled him to vault past a lot of cars. But when he got to Albon, it was just like this impenetrable barrier that he was never able to break through. So Lewis finished 7th behind Alex Albon, and all credit to Alex Albon for that drive around Spa. P6 for Williams Mercedes. Fabulous drive, really. Liam Lawson did well on a day when Isaac Hadjar had no power and finished right at the back of the field. But Liam did a good job, scored points, finished 8th, ahead of Gabriel Bortoleto. Another very good drive from him in the Sauber Ferrari. At one point, he said, tell Nico he needs to go a bit quicker, he needs to get past, I think it was Ocon. And they said, oh no, we'll just swap places. So that's what happened. Not sure what Nico Hülkenberg thought about that. But Gabriel finished 9th, Pierre Gasly 10th. Another classic gritty Pierre Gasly drive, always in there, really finishing a lot higher probably than that Alpine deserves at the moment in terms of its grip and handling. And if you look at Franco Colapinto way down in 18th place yet again, wonder how Jack Doohan would have gone. Ollie Behrman finished 11th again. I think that's the 4th time in a row he's finished 11th for Haas Ferrari, just out of the points, but consistent, that's for sure. Should take into account all the drama of Silverstone, of course, and the penalties there. Nico was 12th, Nico Hülkenberg was 12th. Yuki Tsunoda was 13th after a weird thing on the radio in which they got their pit stops messed up. Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso, it was as if the Aston Martins were not really there. Esteban Ocon 15th, Kimi Antonelli 16th. Lots going on at the back there, DRS trains and so forth. But the real race was at the front. It wasn't a race in terms of being close. It was Oscar Piastri all the way. He did have to think about whether those mediums could make it to the end, but he was helped, as I say, by the drop in ambient temperature, and then also by having no real pressure from Lando and being able to drive around the fronts and look after the left front particularly and keep away from the graining. Excellent job by Oscar Piastri throughout the Belgian Grand Prix from start to finish. So on this occasion it was very close between the two McLaren drivers, but McLaren didn't have to do any decision making other than to ask both of them to sort of slow down as they crossed the line for a photo finish. Not a photo finish in terms of being close, but a photo finish in both being in the same shot. But for a while it looked as if Lando had the advantage. having the pole as he did. But then Oscar immediately sees that back on lap 1, and after that there was really no decisions to be made, because Oscar was never going to lose that Belgian Grand Prix, that's for sure. So that was the weekend at Spa. I don't think Terry Neville was there today. He was there yesterday to present the Pirelli award to Lando, and probably when he was watching on TV he was thinking, why aren't they going out? The wet, we love the rain, go out there guys, let's see it. But no, they didn't. They just sat around and waited, and it wasn't a good thing. I don't think it was a good look for Formula One, but anyway, I was really looking forward to a wet race, and we didn't get it. We just got a parade instead. I suppose that, and I think the powers that be again will say, well, we timed it perfectly because the rain came later on, we just got the race out there when it was nice and dry. I don't think that's what Formula One's all about. I think Formula One is racing in all conditions, and we lost that opportunity today. That's only my personal opinion. Before we go, a quick word about the Ayrton Senna 98T REC watch, which you can still pre-order. One of the 989 limited edition REC watches commemorating the Lotus 98T Renault Turbo driven by Ayrton Senna in the last half of the 1986 season, car designed by Gerard Ducarouge, the last Formula One Lotus to race in black and gold as well. And the aluminium inlet plenum tubes at the top of the engine have been reworked to form the tachymeter of this watch. Absolutely superb DNA in a watch that commemorates not only a great car but also obviously a great driver, Ayrton Senna. And you can order one of those by going to the details in the description below this video. Don't take too long because they're going quickly now, not too many left. Swiss-made automatic watch, beautifully presented as you can see, and it enables you to wear a little bit of great Formula One history on your wrist. And a big thanks to our other sponsors, to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, to OEM Exclusive, and to you, of course, for watching. We'll be back with more videos very soon. And of course, it's the Hungarian Grand Prix coming up as well. Never ending. See you then.